All right, well, it looks like we're broadcasting live. We've got, I see this is ticking up very quickly. We've got over 65 participants on this live webinar. So to those of you who have joined so far, thank you. Hi, I'm Warren Schaefer. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of a company called Knowable. We make audio-first educational courses, and Celeste hosts one of those courses. That course is called Speak with Confidence. It's over 7 hours long and features famous TED speakers, voice coaches, Toastmaster champions. And Celeste, one of the things that made us attracted to this course was that Warren Buffett famously said that when you invest in your communication skills, you basically increase your value in the world by 50%. And Warren Buffett actually took a communication course. So let me pause and introduce you, and then I think the format for this event is really to boil down some of the tidbits and the power tips that you brought forth in the course, and talking to you about how they can translate to the post-COVID times where we're all, a lot of us are presenting and talking to each other over a screen. So Celeste, you're best known probably for being an NPR host and also for giving a very successful TED Talk. Can you give the story of the TED Talk that you gave?
I actually gave the talk in 2015, and it was for a TEDx event in Georgia. The prompt they gave me was, think of a problem in the world and then tell us how to solve it. And quite honestly, I didn't think anyone would be interested in my topic. I'm super interested in conversation, but it's one of those soft skills that when you talk about them, like at work, people roll their eyes back into their heads. So I assumed I was going to be the only person engaged by that talk. So I put in a bunch of jokes. And TED actually put it on their front page in 2016, and it went super viral. And I was probably the most surprised person in the world.
Were you nervous before you went on the TED stage?
No, not really. I've been doing some form of speaking or performing. I'm a professional opera singer. That's what my degrees are in. So, and I guarantee that singing an opera is harder than giving a TED Talk. Giving a TED Talk is hard, but singing an opera is harder. So, I was not nervous. And frankly, when the stakes are low, which I thought they were, I thought the only people really that were going to see it were the 150 people in the audience. It tends to lower your anxiety.
Right. Well, we know the statistic that most people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. And so I wanted to get a sense of the people who are listening today, what their comfort is with presenting. So wanted to just do a quick poll here for the 90 plus people that are listening right now. How many of you feel nervous right before you give a presentation? So that you should all see that poll, hopefully. Let me know in the comments if you don't, and just click yes or no whether you feel nervous, and we'll display the answer there. Okay, hopefully. All right, 93% of people in this audience feel nervous right before a presentation. So I felt nervous before clicking broadcast on this live event, and I've done some of these already. So one of the things that I think a lot of people want to know is how can they be less nervous before they're giving a presentation? What thoughts do you have around that? And is being less nervous even the thing that people should aim for when they're about to speak or give a presentation?
So, first, let me give you some tips on how to be less nervous. And
Okay.
the number one most important tip is you simply have to be more prepared than you think. You have to be able to give that talk backwards and forwards, upwards, downwards, and sideways. And the best way to do that is to not memorize it word for word.
Right.
It's to memorize your bullet points in the order that they need to be in. And the best way to be able to memorize bullet points is to turn it into a story. Like human beings are just biologically and evolutionarily primed to both relay information through stories and to take it in through stories. So if you tell a story through your talk and then you separate it up into sort of like the outline, that's much easier to memorize. And then you don't have to memorize word for word. You're just memorizing telling this story. So that's number one. Make sure you can do it, because things will go wrong while you're talking. So if you're only preparing up to the point where you're prepared, if everything goes exactly right, you're going to be in trouble. The other thing, when you asked whether you should be trying to get rid of your nerves,
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't focus in on it. Frankly, oftentimes nerves, I start to feel nerves just before I step out on stage. I'll get that little burst of adrenaline, and that
Right.
can really help you if you learn to embrace that, and use it to give you energy. That can really help you. And the other thing I would say is that when you're focusing on, I don't want to be nervous, I don't want any nervous, you're literally training yourself to be nervous. Right? I mean, you are pulling that thing towards you by trying to push it away. So
Right.
I would not focus on that.
Right. So what I'm hearing is uh, most people get nervous. The best way to not be nervous is to prepare. And one thing that you had in the course was you don't want to practice until you do it right. You want to practice until you can't do it wrong. Right.
Exactly.
But some of us are procrastinators, me included. And sometimes I feel like that jolt of nerves can actually help me be a better performer on stage. And you're saying, that's part of it, true, too.
Yeah, absolutely it is. As long as you don't, you have to remember that your thoughts and your feelings are not you. So
Yeah.
there's a temptation to feel nervous and think, I am nervous. And that is not what's happening. You are feeling nervous. So if you can take a step back from that experience, that's going to help you embrace it and say, I'm feeling nervous. Oh, here's one thing I can do. I can use this energy in my favor.
Right. And I want to encourage everyone who's listening to submit questions in the chat. There's a Q&A section that you should see down below in your bar. One question that we got from Seth related to this, Celeste, is how do you transform nervous energy into something useful? Are there any specific tactics or ideas that you use?
The one I was talking about is probably the most important one, is making sure that you're not describing yourself as being nervous. And the reason this is important is because as soon as you become sort of aware of what you're feeling without identifying with it, it allows you to transform that into something else. And a lot of times, as cheesy as this may sound, it's just a matter of talking yourself into it with your
Right.
own inner monologue. Right? You can literally say to yourself, okay, I'm feeling nervous. What does that mean? I'm feeling my heart rate go up. I'm feeling my breaths get quicker, and that's exactly what I feel when I'm excited. So okay, I'm excited. And you can talk yourself through that process, and believe it or not, it absolutely will help. Another thing that you can do is transform that nervous energy into actual motion. So jump, run around backstage.
Yep.
People will look at you weird, but go ahead and do it. Do your jumping jacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen people get the little trampoline and like jump
Yep.
on that before. Um,
Absolutely. I
yeah.
will like jog back and forth behind the stage, and you can
Yeah.
literally turn it into adrenaline that way.
Julian Treasure, who's in the course with you, and I think he has over 80 million views on his TED Talks. He talks about taking some deep breaths right before going on stage. Can you talk a little bit about that? A lot of people say breathe into your diaphragm. Is that something that you like? How do you help people really do the breathing exercise, or what are specifically should they be doing?
So it's very
Breath work.
simple. Yeah, you can't physically breathe into your diaphragm since your diaphragm moves involuntarily. But what they're really trying to get you to do is lower your breathing. Nervous breathing is up here, and that's going to affect the tension in your actual vocal cords. So
Right.
you want to push that breathing down till it's centered and lowered. And what Julian is really talking about there is something that he uses to get himself grounded and centered. It doesn't have to be breathing. Now, if you want it to be breathing, all you need to do is count 6 while you breathe in, count 6 while you breathe out. This is something that the Buddhist monk Pema Chodron talks about all the time. It's the pause, right? Take your pause.
Right.
But you can do it in other ways also. You can close your eyes and do a quick meditation where you're imagining your legs are tree trunks and the roots are going down into the earth, right? You can hold on to your pelvis and allow your pelvis to feel like it's the heaviest part of your body. Any of these exercises that people do are really designed to make you feel A, present, and B, grounded and centered.
Right. Right. I feel more grounded already. Thanks.
Sure.
Um, so we've talked about kind of the live presentation in front of an audience, but obviously that happened mostly in the before times, and we're in a different era. So a lot of us are communicating uh, between plastic and separated by a lot of germs out there. What advice do you have for people who are giving presentations online today?
Well, there's a few that are very technical. Number one, don't ever use Wi-Fi to give a presentation. You need to have an actual connection through a cable. Number two, you need good equipment. This is a roadie podcaster. This is my basement. This isn't my like setup studio that I use for presentations. I have a very, very good camera. I have a very good microphone, which is actually a lapel microphone, and I'm using headphones that don't, come down over my head. You can't use the speakers on your computer. Obviously, it's going to echo. So the first thing is to make sure that you have a good equipment set up,
Yeah.
because if you can't rely on your equipment, it's going to make you nervous and it's going to raise your anxiety level.
Right.
The other thing I would say is that when you're using your presentation, so another equipment thing is I kind of only do presentations if I can have dual screens or I have a screen large enough where I can separate them out. I would not look at yourself while you're giving a presentation.
Right.
Minimize Zoom so that you cannot see your face. Because it's just going to make you self-conscious and you're going to start watching yourself as though you're a movie, which is going to cause lag. So instead, have up there your script in one particular case, and the other one have your slide deck, and put your slide deck, as Julian Treasure suggests in the course, put your slide deck in presentation mode.
Yeah.
This is one way where you can have your notes there, and your notes include just your bullet points as well.
Yeah.
If you have to use a script, and I really hope you don't, but if you have to, they have really great teleprompter programs that you can get a little remote for, or use your mouse as a remote, and you can just page them up and down so that you're not constantly searching through. So a lot of these recommendations for doing Zoom presentations basically boil down to that you need to sit down and you need to rehearse it while you're on camera.
Right.
You need to get the sense of what that's like to sit in front of your computer and emote. And I would highly recommend recording it on video, because if you're doing a bunch of gestures and they're all down here, you just look weird. So sometimes when you're presenting, it feels odd to bring your hands up here, but that's where the camera is. And so you have to adjust even your posture and your gestures to make sure you're in the camera angle.
Right. I learned recently that you can actually, when you do present mode, when you share your screen on Zoom to do your presentation, what you're talking about, you can do rehearse slideshow, and on Zoom, an advanced feature is only share a certain portion of my screen. So this is, I think, a power tip for people is you can have your notes right there on screen, and what's actually visible is just the slides themselves. In some ways, I'm wondering if, do you feel it's easier to present over Zoom, or would you rather be in a live setting?
I would much rather be in a live setting. There's a few reasons. Obviously, a lot of the technical problems. There are technical issues when you're presenting live, but they're not mine.
Right.
I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about the power going out or anything like that. I don't have to worry about, my son running down the stairs with no pants on or something.
Viral internet. That's okay. Yeah.
It's not what I want to go viral for. The other thing is that it's so much easier to give a presentation live because of the energy you get back from the audience.
Right.
One of the things I really can't stand about Zoom presentations is, you're delivering and when you're giving a presentation, you are pouring out energy like a fire hose. But when you're live, you're getting some of that reflected back. You can sort of feel the rhythm. You start to get to know, there becomes a relationship between you and the audience.
Right.
And when you're presenting on Zoom, there's nothing.
Right. We have over 120 people listening right now, but we can't see any of you. So what I'm going to do is just do another poll to mimic some component of that live energy. And the question I want to ask really is around, do any of you feel more comfortable presenting over Zoom rather than live? If we can launch that poll, you should see it right now. Who feels Zoom presentations are easier than live presentations? So click Zoom if you think Zoom is easier, or live if you would rather be in front of real humans instead of your screen. And please feel free to keep the questions coming. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible in the comments. See some really great ones already. Thank you, Seth, for that first question.
By a nose.
All right, well, only by a hair does live presentations beat Zoom. So some people actually feel more comfortable talking over Zoom. And I wonder if that's because you can have your notes and no one can tell, or I'm surprised that it's so close.
Me too.
Yeah, I also would prefer talking to people face to face, but we're adaptable human creatures apparently, and this is the new normal.
Yeah.
So I think continuing on that thread of what are best practices for a live presentation or for live speaking that really can translate across both mediums, right? Whether you're talking in person or not.
So, I mean, a lot of it does. I mentioned already the storytelling format. That's true. It doesn't matter what kind of presentation you're doing. Also, the kind of slides that you use translates both ways. Many people make the mistake of thinking that when they're on Zoom, because people are sitting at their computers, they can use more complicated slides with graphs or more words. That is absolutely not the case. People have just as much trouble getting distracted by those things or reading them through on Zoom as they do live. The other thing is that your body energy, like that still has to be there, even if I'm sitting in a chair that's,
right.
you know, right now, and yet my body energy has to absolutely be there because it translates. In fact, sometimes it has to be even higher. My facial expressions have to be even more pronounced because people are staring at me like they were staring at their TV screen. When I'm live, they have my whole body to look at, and then there's usually like a big, display behind me. There's usually like my slide deck is in 3 different screens. I mean, there's a lot to look at. But here, this is it.
Right. So you have to do more with your face.
Yeah.
So do you recommend that people gesticulate more and use hand gestures more, even if they feel like they're coming out of a virtual background, or less, or it's the same?
I think it's pretty much the same. I think in general, people think about gestures too much. And the reason I say that is because if you practice your gestures, everyone knows that you did that. You I mean, unless you're like George Clooney or something, you're not going to be able to sell that well.
Right.
Everyone will know that you rehearsed how you were going to move your hands. I tend to be a person who moves my hands a lot. So I move my hands a lot, but I don't rehearse it in advance or plan it out. I allow myself, here's what you do. You have the difficulty is in getting yourself to the point where you're so relaxed that when your body wants to move, you allow it to move.
Right.
And rather than rehearsing the gestures you're going to make, what you have to focus on is getting to know your speech so well that you're just saying it. You're talking as though you're talking to a friend, and then believe me, the gestures will come and they will look natural because they are.
Right. That makes sense. I want to go into the Q&A and just look for questions so we make sure that we're engaging our audience. So Katie, I think we just talked about this, but Katie asked, many of us are told we use too many gestures. What's your view on using gestures, particularly in video calls? Do you want to summarize the answer again for Katie?
Sure. I would say stop thinking about your gestures, Katie. Relax and just worry about being natural and speaking authentically and saying what's on your mind in an articulate way, and then the gestures will come. But when you do gesture, you have to do them up here.
Right. Anna asks, how do you handle addressing questions? She says, I can't even say and be sincere to say that I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end of a presentation. So some people really invite audience participation, and I know that a lot of speakers really want to make it an interactive experience as much as possible. It sounds like Anna is of the camp that she wants to sort of talk at the audience. What's your view on that, and any recommendations for Anna?
Um, Answering questions is one of the hardest things that a speaker does. And the majority of speakers aren't good at it. And I think that if you're not good at it yet, don't do it. If you have the option, don't answer questions. If you don't have the option, then you just have to get better at it. And what that means is you're just going to have it's what psychologists call exposure therapy, where you just practice it over and over and over. So listen, the reason I don't get nervous anymore is not because I'm so good at what I do and things don't go wrong. It's because things have gone wrong and will continue to go wrong, and it's happened so many times that I've accepted it. Right? This is something I talk about in the course.
Right.
Like, the worst has happened and I was fine.
Yeah.
I still lived and breathed on the other end. So this is the same way with answering questions. When I talk about exposure therapy, it's like just doing it over and over, not until you're perfect, but until when you're not perfect, it doesn't throw you.
I think that normalizing the fact that we can get better as communicators is really important, because there is this misconception that some people are just born natural speakers. They know what to do with their hands. They never look awkward. They never make mistakes. And what you talk about in the course, and what every other expert in the course talks about, is that that's not true, right?
Yeah, that is completely untrue. I mean, yeah, there's going to be people who have more natural skill than others,
Yeah.
but all of it can be taught. It's still a skill. Maybe a small percentage, less than 10% of speaking is a natural innate talent. All
Right.
the rest of it is a skill that can be learned and
Right.
practiced and rehearsed.
So for Anna, who's asking about answering questions in a live setting, what makes somebody good at answering questions live, and how would you answer a question badly, right? How do you know whether you're good or not at answering questions?
A few things, and this happens all the time when I'm interviewing people for NPR or any other place. Somebody who immediately dives into their notes to try to answer a question, that's going to cause a problem.
Right.
Somebody who stumbles a lot because they're afraid to commit, that's going to cause a problem. People who are afraid to admit what they don't know, that's going to cause a problem.
Right.
We don't want you to BS your way through it. If you don't know, just say, I don't know that, but I can tell you this interesting thing.
Right.
So you sort of have to get used to just telling what it is that you do know, and then not worrying about the part of the question you can't answer, or it's not part of your preparation. And
Right.
and that's just exposure. That's just doing it again and again and again. You can literally ask a friend, get a friend on the phone and say, I just sent you my speech, ask me questions about it.
Right. And just think on your feet. I think that "I don't know" are three of the most powerful words that you can probably have in your arsenal if you're expected to answer questions, right? Is to say, "I don't know, but let me get back to you. Let's connect after this," right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Even research studies show that the best thing you can say is, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Right.
And the other thing you can say is, I don't know that, but I know this.
Yeah. The redirect.
Exactly.
Another question that I would like somebody to ask me is, heck,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, Anna, I think what Celeste is saying is that you can get better at answering questions. Practice will certainly help. Saying "I don't know" is also okay. You don't have to know everything when you're up on stage or in presenter mode.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Here's a question, which is: are there any tricks when you're on a stage when you feel like everyone is staring through your skull? I'm not sure I felt that exactly, but I don't know, Celeste. Do you do you have that? Have you had that?
I actually I have had that before. I was singing in a musical and I screwed up the words, and that absolutely felt like the entire audience of 900 people was staring through my skull. So you just have to go on. All the advice that people give you, imagine the audience naked, whatever it may be. If any of that works for you, absolutely do it. But most of the time when you're feeling insecure, it's because you're unsure.
Right.
And that, to me, implies at least that maybe your preparation wasn't as deep as it needed to be. You didn't, as we say in the course, you didn't rehearse until you couldn't get it wrong.
Right. Right. So practice makes perfect, and this
Yeah.
isn't something that you're either just good at or not good at it. You can improve
Right.
and get better.
Practice won't make perfect. It'll just make it secure.
Ooh, good to know. So Angel is asking, it seems like you, Celeste, I assume, not me, Warren, are really good at controlling your emotions when interviewing. Is there anything you do to make sure you don't get frustrated when speaking with someone?
So part of the ways I control my emotions is because I have to as a journalist, and that the we have to go through training and how to accept what someone's telling us um, as their story. Um, so in other words, if somebody tells you something that you disagree with, I list that and I say, to them, this is the truth.
Right.
I mean, and go from there. There's this great improv exercise, and you'll hear in the course that at least a couple people suggest improv exercises to help you get better.
Yeah.
Um, but there's this great improv exercise which is called yes and this is a really good way to practice this kind of mindset because somebody says something to you, the sky is green, and you say, yes, and yesterday it was purple. You're just accepting what you were given and then building on it rather than arguing back. The issue that people often have with that exercise is they want to say yes, but.
Right. So
So there's
adding to it.
yeah, there's exercises that you can get to sort of roll. The reason I'm not getting emotional is because I'm just rolling with it. That's basically the bottom line.
That makes sense. Move forward and don't get stuck in a point you disagree with.
Yeah.
Lee is asking whether you have any tips for online performance. And again, we're just getting this question of it's hard to read the audience compared to a live in-person talk. So obviously, we're trying to use things like polls to gauge whether people are even paying attention or listening. But there's so many distractions available to someone when they're watching online. Do you have any tips or suggestions for how a speaker can engage her audience when presenting online?
You can't. There's no way to get that energy back. And what that means is that you have to rehearse your speech in front of actual people so you can hear when they gasp or when they laugh or a laugh line that you're using that doesn't land, right? You need the
Right,
actual human reaction first. So you literally need people who like you enough to let you recite your speech to them
right,
because there is no way when you're online to get that by what we call biometric information back. You
right,
can't.
right. So just accepting that it's a different medium and a different format.
Yeah.
Um, Celeste, one thing that you spend time in the course talking about is voice, both the quality and tempo. I know there's advice, which is some people, when they get nervous, they speak too fast. Other people tend to speak too slow. Most people don't know whether they speak too fast or too slow. How do I know? How do I know? Am I speaking too fast? Am I speaking too slow? What do you recommend?
So this is why I recommend in the course that the very first thing you do when you're practicing and trying to improve your skills is to record just your voice first.
Right,
Because when you record, a lot of people jump immediately to video. And the problem with that is that you're going to get distracted by the way that you look and the way that you're standing and your gestures. You need to hear yourself. Like just using the laws of acoustics and physics, you have no idea what your voice sounds like.
right,
It's impossible for you to know what your voice sounds like to other people. So you literally have to record it to hear your own voice. I know it's not enjoyable. After 20 years of working for NPR, I still do not enjoy my voice on the radio. I get it, but you have to listen so
right,
you can hear. And another thing that you can do is, again, you got to get, and this is also something that multiple experts recommend over the course of the course, is find your reliable feedback generators, right? You need to find those people who will give you honest feedback. And there's the ones that are really going to be able to tell you when you're speaking too quickly and whether you can um, understand every word that you're saying. Not your mom, if she's just going to tell you how great you are. Not your partner who's going to say, oh, you looked sexy the whole time. No, you need someone who's going to give you honest feedback on whether you're articulate enough, whether you can be understood. I mean, the goal of all of this is that people can understand what you're saying.
Right.
That's why it's not good to talk too slowly or too quickly. It has nothing to do with style or anything like that. It has everything to do with how intelligible you are to the audience. Can they understand?
Right.
Although Marilyn Pittman, fantastic coach who even does live coachings in the course that you can listen in on, which is amazing.
Yep.
She talks a lot about the attractiveness of the voice. But again, the reason why she's concerned about that is because if somebody's listening to you for 45 minutes, your voice needs to be attractive enough to be listened to,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to sound like Gilbert Gottfried for 45 minutes.
He gets paid. So he gets paid to speak, I guess.
I don't know about 45 minutes at a time. Yeah. So that's the purpose of all of that.
Great. I think a big takeaway for me from the course was what you just mentioned, this idea that even if you're doing a video presentation or a live presentation, just record the audio component, because otherwise it's really hard to separate the visual stimulus, which is what we tend to focus on when we're watching ourselves, versus, oh, I'm just hearing how I talk, and oh wow, I talk so slowly or so quickly, or I really mumble my words here and there, or I say uhs, likes, ums. They become much more apparent when you're just listening to the audio.
Yes.
Thanks for that tip. We have another Zoom question from Charlene Fitzgibbon, and Charlene asks, how do you feel about standing up for Zoom presentations? Can that seem too big of a gesture for a Zoom? I am using a standing desk right now, so curious to hear your answer.
And I do often use I'm at a standing desk also. I just have a really high stool.
Yeah.
The difference for me is that, are you going to be comfortable standing for however long your presentation is? If I'm giving a 20-minute presentation, then I'll stand. I even have one of those little things.
What is that?
It's like a
Oh.
board. And the reason I use this sometimes is I can be very still on it, but also it keeps my body energized and engaged, and it keeps the energy in my body. So that's something that's really helpful. You have to find out for yourself. But if I'm giving a 50-minute keynote, there's no way I'm standing the whole time.
Yeah.
That can cause you some trouble because you'll start fidgeting. And it looks like nerves, and you'll make everybody else uncomfortable. So a lot of times if I'm talking for a longer period of time, like right now, I'll sit only so that I want everybody who's watching and is probably also sitting, I want everyone to feel comfortable.
Right. Okay, thanks, Charlene, for that question, and thanks, Celeste, for sharing the cool tech. This is an interesting question from Jessica Jones, and she's asking, Celeste, how do you combat nerves when speaking in front of an audience that may not actually agree with what you're saying, or who may not even want to listen to you for other reasons? And for context, Jessica says, I'm a cis woman who works in tech. And I want to add a note, which is probably a lot of people feel that their audience might be hostile, whether or not the audience is hostile or not. So I think this is a pretty broad question, and not just for somebody who really is going out to a hostile audience.
So I have to do this all the time. And you don't assume that it's hostile, right? For the most part, if you're there to present, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Even if it's only 10 seconds long, you get benefit of the doubt for some period of time.
Yeah.
And you have to take advantage of that by not being judgmental. So, there's the other thing that is my specialty is conversation and communication. And I always say, number one, find the common ground, right?
Yeah.
Be honest about your differences, but find the things you have in common, because that you can build on. And so when you're speaking before people, what is it that you have in common with the people who are out there?
Right.
What is it that you share in terms of challenges, and grow from there? And the other thing I would say is just make sure your research is correct. I think the quote is, smart people won't listen unless you have evidence. You need to make sure that, again, you're not doing. I gave us a day-long workshop for the engineers at Apple.
Yeah.
And having zero engineering degrees or experience working in tech, they were extremely skeptical of me. So how
many engineers are you presenting to?
This was for an entire design department.
Okay.
So it was like maybe 30 or 40 people on this team
Okay.
that we were with all day, and I was forcing them to do improv exercises. So I was challenged a lot. They challenged me and pushed back constantly, but I did my homework. I mean, I hate to keep bringing it back to preparation, but I had the evidence, I had the citations for them. I told them as I was going, I said, "Do you want me to forward these links to you? I can send you the original study," and that makes you, again, it makes you feel more secure, but it's also difficult to argue with that. If people are trying to argue, and they often do, I don't argue back with them. I just say, "What's your source?" That's really interesting. That's unlike anything I've heard from any of the experts I've spoken to. What's your source?
Yeah, that's a good question. Another one to add to the arsenal. Thanks, Jessica, for that question. So this is a really common one from Stephen Hill. Stephen asks, any tips on helping me drop the use of as a filler between thoughts?
So the first thing is record yourself and make sure you're saying as much as you think you are. The second thing is that why, you have to think about, why do you say um generally it's because you're having trouble coming up with whatever it is that you're going to say next. So again, the more secure you are in your material, the less likely you are to say now if is more like a tick for you, and it is for some people, that they just sort of default to um then it's just going to be a matter it's just going to be a matter of practicing to where you internalize, you say that inside your head and you don't verbalize it. It
Right,
is totally okay to slow down to the point, and it's possible that you're using that as a way to slow down your thinking, and I support that. That is awesome. But because it can become overwhelming if it's used too much, it's something where you just want to rehearse making it silent. Make the something that happens in your head.
right. I think many people, including me, are often uncomfortable with silence, right? Any moment of pause. Can you actually talk about that? Because you discuss this in the course. Silence can actually be really powerful, maybe harder on Zoom, but what's your thoughts generally on being comfortable with pauses and silence?
And it's interesting how many of these things end up being themes coming from different experts. And I should say, having gone through this course, we did not design it that way. We simply asked the questions and they answered as they would. And it just turned out that there were very common things that everyone talked about. Silence was one of them. And silence can be so powerful in terms of creating a landscape, an oral landscape. You have to think. So if you were to hear music and the music was basically forte, very loud, all the brass and the drums playing, and that was it for the whole time, right? That's not very enjoyable. You need sometimes the volume needs to drop. You need sometimes to have a short breather. So silences can be used just to create this landscape of variety. The other thing is that a silence is a breath. So allowing people silence in the middle of a phrase, which I just did, allows their brains to absorb what they just heard. It automatically implies that what I just said is important. It allows them to absorb it, and then you take a beat, and then you move on to whatever it was you're going to say. You're just helping the audience. You're helping yourself, of course, but you're also helping the audience to understand what they're hearing and put it in context, and really think about it and absorb it. Giving them that break, sometimes that's all that they need to get it into their memory banks, as opposed to just in one ear and out the other.
Right. It sounds like a lot of people use ums and ahs to think, to take that time to think. And
Yes.
going back to that question around how to deal with questions, because those are probably the times where you can't prepare what you're going to say. If you get a live question, you're more likely to have ums, ahs, filler words. And I remember one trick, I saw Jamie Dimon speak live. He's the CEO of JP Morgan, and he took three questions at a time. He said, okay, question one, question two, question three. And he had a pen with him and he just wrote down the three questions. And that allowed him time to think and to process and to decide which questions he wanted to answer, in which order, how we could reframe them. So when you're in that speaking position, I think finding ways to find control too is also really powerful.
I do a similar thing in which oftentimes I'll repeat the question back. Even if they're mic'd, I will repeat it back. So does two things for me. It gives me that time that Jamie Dimon is also taking, but it
Yeah.
also makes sure I make sure that I understand what question they're asking me.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks for sharing that. So this is I'm sure a question a lot of people have. Bhavya is asking, what should be done when you fumble?
You have to just acknowledge it and move on.
Yeah.
If it's a small fumble, nobody cares, just move on. But if
Yeah.
it's a big one, then you just say, oops.
What's a small fumble and what's a big fumble?
So, for example, if you screw up a word, you say, "Oh, that's not what I meant to say," and you can go back. Or you can just, if I say, and I'm also an expert in coordination. I mean, communication.
Right.
You just need to move on. If
Quick
it's
joke.
a
Move forward.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. If it's a big one, like when I was giving a TED talk in Seattle, the wrong slide came up. And I said, "Oh, hang on. This is the wrong slide. We're going to need to pause for just a second. And I'm going to wait here until the engineers back behind me that you can't see tell me that it's okay."
Yeah. So again,
And
pausing, being okay, being comfortable with some silence. Mistakes
yeah,
happen.
this is a thing, like I wrote about in one of my books. Like, imagine for a moment that you're watching a play and it's a really dramatic moment and the lead actress's wig starts to slide off of her head.
Yeah.
Right? She has a lot of options on what she can do next, but the worst option is to pretend like it's not happening,
Right.
because nobody will hear a word she says. Everyone is only focused on that wig, right? So probably one of the best things she can do is either rip it off and drop it, or adjust it and say, "Oh, this stupid wig," and adjust it and pin it back in, and then move on. And it's the same thing with mistakes when you're speaking.
Just acknowledge the awkwardness, right? That often relieves so much of the tension of the moment.
Yes.
Yeah. This is a really interesting question from Liana. She asks, you, Celeste, have you always been a natural speaker, i.e. since a young age? And the reason that she's asking is because her 10-year-old son is listening to this presentation along with 110 other people right now, and wants to know whether there are any tips for children to become good presenters.
Um, for children to become good presenters, keep it short. That's number one. You just want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. So when I was a kid, a 5-minute talk was a major achievement, and I was good at it because I talked all the time. So for kids, you want to keep the sentences. You do not want to focus on impressing anybody. You don't want to use vocabulary you're not very, very familiar with. It all needs to be in your own voice. And this is what I want to focus on, especially for children. But frankly, it's also important for adults. When you are a younger person, especially, you have to really focus on making sure that speech is in your own voice, not in the kind of voice that you use to write homework assignments. That's your voice on paper, and that is very different voice than the one that is comes out of your mouth. People don't realize that those are two very different writing styles, and we talk about this in the course. You're writing for the ear when you're writing a speech. You're not writing for the eye. We have all kinds of
Just
Death
gonna
just
roll with it.
rolled.
I'm gonna acknowledge that something fell. You never know what it was.
I'm gonna imagine it was a cat just knocking crap off your shelves. In any case,
A raccoon came in, followed by a deer. Yeah.
exactly. But in any case, when you're reading like a New York Times article, when you don't understand something, when something is unclear, when a word is unfamiliar, you can pause all you want, you can go back, you can reread it. We have all these things that help us understand it. You have none of that when someone's speaking. So you have to make sure your sentences are short and declarative, that you're writing for people to understand what you're speaking, and again, that you're writing in your own voice, something that you would normally say over the course of a regular day.
Right. Celeste, I want to call out one thing that I've noticed that you do on Zoom that I think a lot of people would be interested in, which is one thing that you can do is you can move closer or farther away from the camera. Can you talk a little bit about how you use depth to camera when you're speaking and trying to create a sense of engagement?
So first of all, if it depends on how intimate I feel the speech is. If
Yeah.
it's very intimate, then I need to get closer. So, because people need to be able to feel as though we're sitting across from each other. I
Right.
use depth to recreate the environment in which they would be seeing me. Right.
Right.
So if we're in a workshop and there's say 20 people here, they would be seeing like this much. This is the sort of intimacy that we'd have.
Right.
If I want to create the feeling of like a bigger presentation, then I'll move back and I probably will have my nice little backdrop behind me so that they can see more of my torso.
Yeah.
And then if I want it to make it feel like we're just sitting across a coffee table from one another, then I'll move in closer so they can really see my eyebrows moving and everything
Right.
about me.
Right.
So that's sort of how I use depth, to manipulate how intimate it either feels or doesn't.
That's helpful. Thanks. So quick time check. It looks like we're actually a little bit over time. So are you able to take a couple more questions?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just going to look through these comments really quickly. A challenge for Zoom and live presentations definitely is having to switch between presenting and talking, and also looking at other comments. I'm curious if you have any quick thoughts on how I could do a better job of being both present with you, but also engaging with the audience and their questions.
I don't try to pretend like I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I break away and I say, okay, let me read this question, and then people can clearly see me reading, and then I rejoin. I just open up the curtain and let them see the man behind the curtain.
Yeah. So this is a question from Hamza. Thank you for that. That's helpful. So I looked through the questions and I want to call this one out from Hamza. There are lots of great questions here, so apologies that we're not going to get to all of them. But Hamza is asking basically about camera angle for Zoom and where should you look? I've noticed that it sounds like, am I correct that you just close Zoom so you're not even seeing me right now?
I am not seeing you.
Yeah.
I don't, see, you're over in my corner screen way down there at the bottom, so you're not in my line of sight.
Yeah.
I just look straight at the camera.
Yeah.
And I have no other windows open to distract me. There's already too many distractions going on in my house anyway.
Yeah.
So I just look straight at the camera.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing to get a little bit dorky and wonky on you.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting phenomenon, and one of the reasons why Zoom is more exhausting than just talking to people in real life is because of this thing that's called the illusion of eye contact.
Right.
Our brains don't really understand it. It doesn't give us the kind of biometric feedback that makes us feel good and lifts our mood, but it gives us the illusion that we're getting that. So it can be very stressful. And I think it's good because of that. And you just saw me do it. I think it's good to break away.
Right.
Think of it this way. And in my original TED Talk, when I'm doing the 10 ways to have a better conversation, I talk about the fact that maintaining eye contact is not necessary. If you're talking to someone in regular life, you're not going to sit there staring at them the entire time. That is unnerving and upsetting. And it's the same thing when you're at Zoom. You do not want to be staring straight at the camera all the time. You need to give people this short period of time. And this is something they've talked about in the course. How many seconds before you break away and give people a break from staring in your eyeballs? I think we have lost Warren for a second. That high-pitched noise that you heard was us losing Warren. So I'm just going to recite the Gettysburg Address, which I still remember from when I was in elementary school.
Okay.
No, there we go. We got him back.
I am not the host of the video. I muted because there was a truck passing by, and I thought that would be a polite thing to do, and then I couldn't unmute myself. So I felt like Neo in the Matrix, where I lost it.
Right.
Well, I'm glad that this was a live coaching session for me in many ways, and I feel like I've learned a ton, Celeste. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and you've had years of experience speaking in all sorts of different venues. I really enjoyed your course. I'm obviously biased because it's part of Knowable and it's exclusive to Knowable, but I think that communication is one of those things that we can all get better at constantly through life, and it's liberating and helpful. It was very helpful to me. And I know we've got a code to share for people who stuck through with us to the end. It looks like there's still over 100 people. And that code is Warren sent me, and that'll give you 50% off Celeste's course. So if
wow. Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So that works out to be just $25.
Yeah, the course is awesome. Knowable really brought in some of the best experts in this field and a diverse pool of experts, and there's just every single one of them has like tangible, actionable tips for people, and I just think it's good. Obviously I'm biased also, but I think it's really cool.
I do too. I think it's really special. And thank you again for making the time for this live event and for sharing your knowledge and tips with us of how to be better speakers. I've learned a ton. Anything I didn't ask you that I should have, Celeste?
Presenting live is good for you, even if you screw up. It's good for you. It's good for you cognitively. It's a challenge. It wakes up your brain cells. It makes you think about things in new ways. So try it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. For those of you who asked questions, thank you for submitting them. We'll send a link to the coupon code, and we'd love to hear from you. You can find Celeste on Twitter. She's got an amazing book that just came out as well called Do Nothing. It's very important and goes beyond just a subject of speaking and talking about how we should all be thinking about how we spend our time. So Celeste, thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for joining. You can find us at knowable.fyi, and we look forward to talking more in the comments. Bye, Celeste.
Bye.